What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network for another installment of Top Decks in Standard format. This time it is the first week that Hidden Fates was legal in Standard, and the major event here was Sheffield Regionals. So the following decks have been determined to be the most competitively viable and high-performing decks of the current format, which is Ultra Prism through Hidden Fates as of today. The tournaments that have occurred in this format only include Sheffield Regionals and League Cups, but the pre-Hidden Fates meta was drastically similar and included the World Championships, the Melbourne Special Event, and the Open. So remember, Hidden Fates became legal on September 6th, and we have barely been past that date as of the recording of this video. League Cup results are also a factor, but they have less weight in deciding the decks on this list in comparison to the weight that the major events results have. So this week I have separated the top decks, since I do think there are so many viable top decks, but there are two in just a different echelon. So we're going to call Tier S the top tier above Tier 1, Ability Reshi and Mewtwo Box. They are just having such insanely different results, and Mewtwo Box maybe not so much as Ability Reshi with the overwhelming results, but I'll get into some of those factors in just a bit. But Ability Reshi has been destroying League Cups, doing very well at Sheffield, and it is being called the best deck in format, the most popular deck, the deck to watch out for, the deck to beat. And then in Tier 1, High Tier 2, we have Green's Reshi, Blacephalon-Naganadel, Pikarom Gardeon, and Pidgeotto Control. So the only thing that's really changed here is that I've separated these top two that are on a different level from the other five, and that Pidgeotto Control is now somewhat established as a top deck after Sheffield Regionals results. So going right into Ability Reshi, Robin Schultz took this list to a 6th place finish this past weekend in Sheffield Regionals. Still going off of the base list that Limitless used at Worlds, which I'm sure you've seen plenty of content on by now. But if you haven't, there's more on that in other videos on this channel. He added a third Vulpix, probably because there were some Jinx being teched into Malamars to try to pick off a Vulpix early. And then the Blacephalon from Unbroken Bonds, the Reset Stamp, and the energy count has been dropped down, and then Fire Crystals have been added. And this is thought to be in response to Wobbuffets being put into opposing deck lists to stop your Victini Prism Star from attacking, or make you have to gust up the Wobbuffet to attack with Victini. But Fire Crystal is also good in a deck where you're playing Blacephalon Unbroken Bonds. So it could have also been, it could have been for a number of reasons. But we'll take a look at those mentioned cards here. So Blacephalon has been added for its attack Fireball Circus. For 3 energy, discard any number of fire energy cards from your hand. This attack does 50 damage for each card you discarded in this way. So it can rack up a ton of damage for being a single prize attacker. And it only needs an attachment and then a welder to attack. The Fire Crystals, of course, you've seen these before in fire decks, but they have been put in place of actual energies. And I think that could also be because the Fire Crystals are a target for Stellar Wish, and Fire Energy are not. And then the Reset Stamp, which I think is nice as a surprise in Ability Reshi, since people might have assumed Ability Reshi, an aggressive deck, was not going to play Reset Stamp. I think it could be nice in there for that reason, but moving forward, if people expect Reset Stamp, then I think it loses some of its value, but it's still a very strong card. So Ability Reshi, it's built to be a streamlined deck. It's aggressive, it can finish games quickly, it has a myriad of attackers, and it has the best gust effect in the game in Ninetales from Team Up. This deck was a very strong contender at Worlds that we did not expect as a community to be so strong at Worlds, and then since then it has been dubbed one of the best decks, if not the best deck in the format. Mewtwo Box, this deck won World Championships. So let's see how it's doing now. Romain Delhout got 12th place at Sheffield Regionals with it. And a new inclusion from Hidden Fates is Charizard GX. Since its GX attack does 300 for 4 energy, it's a nice option to have. And then also added in here is Wobbuffet from Lost Thunder, which I mentioned can shut off Victini Prism. And then the Tapu Fini, which is a Blound Tech. Other than that, the list has remained true to Henry Brand's Worlds list. And this deck is still very, very strong. No reason to go anywhere. Power plants can be a soft counter. I'm not even sure if you can consider them a hard counter, since the Mewtwo deck plays 4 stadiums and a Mars Shadow that can also remove stadiums. So power plant is usually a nuisance, but in my experience, hardly ever strongly effective versus a Mewtwo deck, unless you get a real game swinging turn with like Custom Catcher up their Mars Shadow, stamp them to like 2 cards, and put out a power plant. But even then, they thin their deck very quickly and are able to play around power plant. So these 3 cards, please don't mind the blurry Charizard GX. That is the best image of the English card I could find on the internet. But the Wobbuffet, as long as this Pokemon is on your bench, Prism Star Pokemon in play, can't attack and have no abilities. So it can slow down Pikarom, but it's really there for Victini Prism. Tapu Fini's Nature Wave can be used for a colorless if your opponent has any Ultra Beasts in play, so that's a nice one-shotter versus Blacephalon. And then, like I mentioned, the Charizard GX swings 300 for 4 energy. So instead of needing 6 fire for the Reshi Zard's Double Blaze GX attack, this one just needs 2 fire and 2 colorless. But it doesn't go through effects like Double Blaze, so most lists will include both of them to have that variety of attackers that Mewtwo Box is so well known for. So, Mewtwo Box, why is it one of the best decks? Well, it's really consistent. It rewards skillful play, and right off the bat, those 2 are super important to top players. It can be aggressive due to Welder, and it has outs to many situations due to its multiple different GX attacks that it can use, regular attacks it can use. It has high HP, so you can switch and go between multiple attackers. It's a very strong deck, consistent deck, high skill ceiling. It's kind of everything you want in a deck, and that's why it's one of the 2 best decks in the format, in my opinion, and in many others' opinions as well. Moving on to the next tier down of decks, which will be the remaining 5 decks covered. Green's Reshi. This list was taken to top 8 by Jack Culkin at Sheffield. Not too much deviated from other lists we've seen. The Lusamine has been seen in other lists, but I like to highlight that because it's a card I really enjoy in this deck. He did include a Lugia GX, which we're just going to get right into that one. I have to imagine it was for Lost Purge GX, but I'm not too much of a fan of this because it just gives the deck another poor starter that is not Baby Volcanion. But if Jack Culkin's reasoning comes out and it's something that's really game-changing for the deck or a matchup, then possibly I would try it out. He did well with the deck, so don't knock it until you try it, but at just a glance, I kind of dislike having an 8th basic Pokemon in the deck. And then Lusamine's really nice to get back power plants versus something like Mewtwo, where they can just remove stadiums left and right. And also, if you just want to get back some greens or welders for the following turns, Lusamine is a nice, diverse supporter. So Green's Reshi, its explanations haven't changed. It can be built to fit the player's preferences. It has a very high skill ceiling. It allows strong comeback potential, and Green's allows you to play based on your deck, not your hand, which is very, very nice and reminiscent of older era supporters that allowed you to search for specific cards and not just hope to draw into them. Blacephalon-GX Naganadel. This came off of a 2nd place at Worlds, and now Martin Golbert has received 4th place at Sheffield with it. It has not changed very much from Shintaro Ito's list. Still running the Naganadel GX, just down to the 1 Heatran, but I do really like this list. I think the Bills analysis is a nice consistency addition to maybe hit your B strings or even your 1 of reset stamp at the times when it's necessary. Just taking a look at some of the key cards that aren't in every Blacephalon list, but I imagine most of you watching will still be familiar with these cards and their functions in the Blacephalon Naganadel archetype. So Blacephalon Naganadel is pretty simple as to why it's up here in the top decks. It has explosive turns, and its high damage output, but only 2 prize card reward trades favorably with tag team based decks. And if you are playing the Naganadel GX, which I do think is a smart idea, it has onboard draw support, which is kind of rare in this format. Next up is Pikarom, and I really love the list that Logan Madden went with here to get 2nd place at Sheffield, as opposed to the Melbourne special event list that won that I was not too much of a fan of. This one really takes it home for me. He's playing a Hoopa to possibly counter some Malamar variants, which are still popular, even though the community is kind of torn on whether that deck should be considered a high tier archetype or not. Then playing the 4 Judge 4 Volkner, which is my preferred supporter lineup for the deck. And then 2 Lysander Labs to get around Spell Tag and Lightning Charm on the Guardians and things like that. Although this list still did lose to Gardeon in finals. And I think to really seal that matchup, you want an Oranguru in place of that Hoopa to get back your Labs and some powers to go that extra mile against Gardeon. But a very good list. I think this is like close to perfect, and if you're interested in the archetype, you probably want to start here. Just some important cards noted: the Hoopa with Evil Admonition, that's very good versus Tina tags because it's resistant to Tina and it hits it for weakness. The Judge, which is disruptive, especially versus greens variants that like to hold on to very large hands. And then the Lysander Labs, which I mentioned. Pokemon tool cards in play have no effect, so it's great versus Lightning Charm, and it's great versus Spell Tag. So Pikarom is just a very explosive deck, much like Blacephalon, but it's a little more technical because of its Tag Bolt, which can hit 2 Pokemon at once. And you also have more than 1 attacker. You have Alolan Raichu GX as well, and then Zeraora can be used as an attacker. And it's a tag team Pokemon, so it also gives up more prizes than Blacephalon do, but they're both very aggressive decks. It is rather consistent, and it has explosive draw power via the Dedenne GX, and then strong search with Electromagnetic Radar and Volkner. It is getting kind of a stigma around the Judge version that it's not consistent. But if you start Jirachi and Judge, you're usually fine. And if you don't start Jirachi, then you want to go for a different option than Judge. Maybe go for a Dedenne GX to use Dede change off the bat and get yourself a little more set up before using the Judge. Gardeon, one of the last decks on the list. This actually won Sheffield Regionals, but we do not have the list. The winner of the regional has not made his list public yet. So in lieu of that, we have Stephen Mal's list. He came top 16 at Sheffield Regional. His list is very good, except I don't like the omission of Fairy Charm Ultra Beast. Other than that, I really like his list. The Xerneas GX or the Mimikyu GX are both very fine additions to the deck. The Wait and See Hammer is really great versus Reshi, but I am skeptical of how much it can actually swing that matchup. So let's take a look at some of the key cards here. Xerneas GX, its Sanctuary GX is where it's used for move all damage counters from each of your Pokemon to your opponent's active Pokemon. So if a Reshi swings into your Guardy for 230, you Sanctuary GX it all onto the Reshi. If it was already damaged and you're taking a knockout, maybe you have 2 damaged Guardies. They didn't knock out 2 of them. They started them but didn't finish them. Wait and See Hammer is a very interesting tech. You can use this card only if you go second and only on your first turn. Discard an energy from one of your opponent's Pokemon. So if your opponent goes first, they're playing a Reshi deck, which is what this is used for, and they go like attach Welder so they can do the turn 2 Double Blaze. then you just wait and see hammer on your first turn. They're down to 2 energy and they cannot get the turn 2 double blaze for 300, setting them back a bit. And then Power Plant, not uncommon in Gardeon. In fact, it's pretty much a staple of the deck, but I just wanted to add it up here since it is so important in the deck, and it's the deck's tendency to turn off your opponent's GX abilities is a very important part of its control strategy. So Gardeon Explained, it can be built to fit the player's preferences. Most of these are common within Green's variants. While Green's Reshi has higher damage output, though, the change is that Gardeon has more control due to its Magical Miracle GX, which if you have 6 Fairy Energy attached, the attack swings for 200, and your opponent just shuffles their hand into their deck, and they're left with a 0-card hand. So you kind of trade the higher damage output of Reshi for the more controlling aspect of Gardeon, and the deck is also now built to be more controlling than the Reshizard variant is. Lastly, Pidgeotto control, which was an honorable mention last week, kind of a wild card. I wasn't sure if it was going to solidify itself as a top deck, but now it got top 4 in the hands of Fabi and Pujol at Sheffield Regionals. Not many changes here from the DDG list at Worlds, except they did cut Brock's Grit. Fabian said he didn't feel like it was necessary, and in Isaiah Williams' interview on Trainer Chip's channel, I believe he also said they only played a 1 Brock's Grit because prizing it wasn't too bad for them. So I imagine Fabian kind of took that notion to take it out and put in a 3rd Mars, and not many other changes, if any, to the list from there. But yeah, like I said, no major changes, just cutting the Brock's Grit. There's 3 Mars now. And not using Jessie and James in this list, which I think is correct and why he was successful. Jessie and James in the deck really doesn't do what you need it to do, because you need to draw through your deck. You need to get to the bottom of your deck for what you resource managed previous turns, and that's why Mars is good here. And you can still discard your opponent down to a 0-card hand. But with Jessie and James, the thought was you could do it earlier. You can get them down to 4 prize cards, then stamp, then double Jessie and James. But there's really no rush to get to that point. Just wait until they're at 2 and do it with Mars, and then you have a more effective loop since you're drawing through your deck at the same times with Mars. So Explained, kind of what I was saying about the lock. It can establish a perfect lock with Stamp to 2, Lieutenant Surge, play 2 Mars, and then Chip Chip Ice Axe. I may have actually been incorrect. The DDG may have also played 3 Mars, so don't quote me on that, actually, because I do think 3 Mars is pretty important to the deck since you want to double Mars. Yeah, DDG might have also had played 3 Mars. That's my bad if they did, and Fabian didn't change that. Other explanations on how it's played and why it's here. If it wins along game 1, it will usually win the entire set. So if you play game 1 correctly, you usually don't have to play another correctly. You'll just the games take so long that you'll win the entire set. And the control decks usually prey on unprepared lists and misplays, which is why I think it maybe wasn't an amazing choice for Worlds, but I think it's a really good choice for regionals and events that allow any players in that are more likely to maybe have a less optimal list or misplay against a control deck. So just a little bonus in this video, where exactly was Jessie and James? The supporter card everyone was talking about from Hidden Fates. Each player discards 2 cards from their hand. Your opponent discards first. Well, it was in the 36th place list from Alessandro Cremascoli. He played Shedinja, and he did include 2 Jessie and James instead of Mars in his deck. So in Shedinja, since you're drawing through your deck with Zebstrika, I do think it's actually appropriate here, as where in Pidgeotto control it was not, because you're using Pidgeotto and you don't draw your whole deck with Zeb. So here I do think the Jessie and James is appropriate. This list was not as successful as the Pidgeotto control, but it still made day 2. It came in top 64. Maybe there's some tweaks to make with this deck. I'm not sure about the players' matchups or playing himself, if there were any misplays or user error that caused the deck to not perform as well as Pidgeotto control. But definitely something to keep an eye on. Jessie and James was present. Just an important note that I wanted to make there. I hope you guys enjoyed this video on the top decks of the first weekend of Hidden Fates being legal and standard. Got a nice explanation of what the top decks are, how they work, and some great lists for them that you can find over on limitlesstcg.com to export to your PTCGO, import to your PTCGO if you would like to try them out for yourself. As always, check out flipsidegaming.com for 10% off of your next order, $10 or more, and also feel free to read my free articles on that site that are usually weekly. Check me out on all the other links. Subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.